Everyone. Thanks for taking the time out today to listen to our strengths-based selection webinar. Um, just to introduce myself to you, I'm the Key Account Manager over here at Strengths Partnership. My name's David Price. Today's topic is strengths-based selection, future-proofing your hiring approach. You should have already received the blog today, just outlining some 5 cardinal things to recruiting. So that'll just give you a little bit of background information about our approach to strengths-based selection. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start off today. So we're going to try and make this an interaction session. We've muted everyone, so if you do need to ask a question, so just type it into the text box and we'll try and tackle that as soon as we get a question. Can I just check everybody can hear me okay? Okay, that's good. Thanks for the clarification there. So we are going to record the session as well. So we're just about to record now, and all the slides and a recording of the session will be circulated at the end as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce first of all Paul Britton, who's our co-founder at Strengths Partnership. So Paul, over to you.
Thanks, David. Hello, everybody. I think David mentioned it, but if you, as you said, it's an interactive session. As far as we can make it interactive, which sadly does not mean from an audio point of view. So, because of the varying levels of feedback that you get from having lots of people sharing the same platform, we decided just to use the message box. So, as we go through the slide deck. Okay, we're just getting a message here that the audio is a little bit patchy. Can I check, is that the same for everybody? Yeah. Okay, so you're saying it's cutting out every now and again? Okay, let's see if we can do something about that.
Okay, just bear with us. We're going to try to dial in.
Yeah, what we're doing is using laptop as our platform. Apologies if you can't do it well. We are going to go to the phone instead, so we'll keep using the slides.
Hello, can you hear us now? Hooray! Okay, that's good. Apologies for that. Looks like we had a slightly patchy internet connection from this laptop, so hopefully that won't affect the visuals. You should all be able to see a PowerPoint presentation titled Strengths-Based Selection, Future-Proofing Your Hiring Approach. Hopefully everybody can see that. Anybody not able to see that? Okay, most people are saying that's all right. So apologies for starting a little late. Our plan is to finish, I believe we have an hour program, but we'll probably try and make that more like sort of 35, 40 minutes if that's okay. David mentioned about using the messaging box. You're already doing that, so thank you for doing that, and do continue to use the message box as we go through the webinar, asking questions as we go. We'll try and pick them up. Sometimes when there's a whole series of questions that come up rapid fire, it's a bit tricky to answer them all simultaneously or one quickly after another. So we'll try and capture those and respond to as many as we can in the moment. Otherwise, we'll respond to them at the end. Or if we can't answer any questions or there's anything that's very specific to one person asking, then we'll probably come back to you at the end of the webinar. And when we send through the slides to you, we'll also respond to any of those questions so that we've got those captured. So I think we should just kick off really, because we've spent long enough trying to organise the webinar itself. So what we're going to cover in the time that we have is the business case for a strengths-based approach to selection. I want to ask the question and answer the question as well, are strengths and competencies different, and if so, how? One of the important elements of today, from our point of view, is to describe to you our approach to strengths-based interviewing, the OPAL approach to interviewing. And also to touch on, although in the time we've got it will probably be a fairly cursory treatment of broader strengths-based assessment, so thinking about a wider context of recruitment assessment than just the interview. So the main focus for today is thinking about that, and also the main components that go into an effective strengths-based interview and recruitment process. And then finally, just to touch on how to access the approach. So everything that we touch on today, we'll give you the materials, but in terms of accessing for future and upskilling, we'll talk about that probably largely after today, but we'll touch on it at the end as well. So hopefully you're seeing these slides updating. I know for some of you it may be slightly slower, so I'll leave a little bit of a few seconds in between each slide change. I don't know what's going on in this picture. Yeah, the question here is, how do you calculate the cost of a poor hiring decision? Has this guy been fired? Has she been fired? And he's just saying, you know, she's saying, leave me alone. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, you know, there it is. There's the picture. It's obviously not a good situation. So how do you calculate the cost of a poor hiring decision? Well, there's a whole host of metrics that people have accrued over the years. Lowered productivity, morale of the team is lowered, the time spent managing the poor performer, potentially time lost in onboarding, and upskilling if rehiring is required, as well as the time spent searching for a replacement. So the varying kind of judgments on this are around perhaps 30% of the individual's first year salary as the average cost of a poor hiring decision, which is probably fairly conservative. Gallup estimate in the US the annual cost in lost productivity due to disengagement at work is between 450 and 550 billion, part of which will relate to originally poor hiring decisions. So the question for all of us to ask ourselves is your recruitment process and or your client's recruitment process delivering all that it could be? At this point, I was going to risk giving you a short video starring Steve Jobs, but I'm probably not going to. You know, why not? Let's just see if it works. I think most people wouldn't know me. That's not Steve Jobs, by the way. Can you see that, folks? If you can't see it, hopefully you can hear it.
It's because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. absolutely love it, you're going to give up. And that's what happens to most people, actually. If you really look at the ones that ended up, being successful, unquote, in the eyes of society, and the ones that didn't, oftentimes it's the ones that were successful loved what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane. Right? You wouldn't want to put up with this stuff if you don't love it. So it's a lot of hard work, and it's a lot of worrying constantly. And if you don't love it, you're going to fail. So you got to love it. You got to have passion. And I think that's the high order bit. The second thing is you've got to be a really good talent scout. Because no matter how smart you are, you need a team of great people. And you've got to figure out how to size people up fairly quickly, make decisions without knowing people too well, and hire them, and see how you do, and refine your intuition, and be able to help build an organization that can eventually just build itself, because you need great people around you.
Okay, that's all from him for now. Hopefully you can see the slide again. Apologies if that was not the best quality. It doesn't sound as though it was. A number of you have said that it wasn't great quality. It's a very short video, so I just thought I'd risk it, but may not have been worthwhile. We'll send you the link. Essentially, to paraphrase what Steve Jobs was saying, he was talking about the importance of passion. He was talking about the importance of loving what you're doing in order to stick with it and to build perseverance and build resilience. And really, for us, that's the essence of the strengths-based approach to recruitment. It's helping organizations to find people who aren't just great on paper, who aren't just good as far as their CV, as far as their experience, as far as their skills and competencies are concerned, but also people who have the energy, the fit, the passion, the excitement, the enthusiasm around what the organization stands for, what the role will require, what the team needs them to do. And that really for us is the extra piece of the puzzle, hence the graphic here. So in our experience, and in the experience of most organizations now who have dip tested, pilot tested the strengths approach, and some of them have gone beyond that and have been using it for a number of years, but it's still a minority. The strengths-based approach to recruitment helps to get to the real person, the unique individual, their passions, their energy, and it separates out those people who've become very good or very competent, in fact, at competency-based interviews. Of course, a lot of the career guidance that now individuals at school and at university are provided with relates to effective interviewing skills. And so you're trained to come out of university or out of work experience or early in career experiences with a whole host of different examples tucked under your arm of where you've done this or that, and how you can therefore tick the competency boxes in a standard competency interview. So from our point of view, the strengths approach digs deeper, goes further, and helps you to find who that individual naturally, authentically is under all of those examples. Additional benefits, candidate advocacy as a result of improved candidate experience. The employer brand is improved. Unsuccessful candidates tend to be more accepting of the rejection because they're receiving positive feedback on their strengths, and where they may be a better fit, so there's a better candidate experience more broadly. Reduction in attrition because people are a better fit, so they're more likely to stay and not leave early in post. Reduced training cost because new hires are motivated to stretch their strength areas because they've had them spotted, discussed, acknowledged by their line manager, by their teammates. More engaged employees, improve satisfaction and loyalty and profit if it's relevant in your organization, and so on. There's a whole host of other benefits and advantages. There are downsides as well, though, and it's important to mention at least a few of these. So downsides include training people to use the approach well, getting line manager engagement and interviewer engagement. So answering the what's in it for me question. Why should I learn a new skill set around interviewing in a different way. You know, I've spent a long time honing my skills at interviewing for competencies, and now I'm being asked to do something different. You know, why should I do that? Also, there's a broader challenge for organizations who want to bring this approach in, and it's doing something genuinely different, genuinely challenging what is already out there as kind of received wisdom, rather than just rebranding competencies as strengths. And we've seen that in some cases, in some organizations, they've really just gone through a kind of reframe exercise. They're still using the competency approach, but they're just talking about it from a strengths perspective, and there's precious little difference between them. But from our point of view, there is a genuine difference between looking at both. So to give a bit more background on this, and by the way, before I start talking to this slide, we think that it's important to cover both in the assessment and recruitment process. So competencies tend to be job-driven, specific to the role. A strength tends to cross organizational and role boundaries. It tends to be more person-driven, so it's more about the individual. The competency approach is inherently normative. The aim is to develop rounded performance in a number of areas, whereas the strength approach recognizes individual uniqueness. Finally, the competency approach describes current performance, where the strength approach can describe current performance. And actually, in our approach, the approach we advocate, you are looking at current performance or past performance, but it also describes future potential for performance and also for learning. So there are differences between the two as we see it. And we do believe, as I say, that both are valuable, both are necessary. And in fact, you need both, as well as an alignment with organizational goals and the organization's strategy in order to achieve peak performance for each employee. So our position on this is that peak performance is achieved when employees have the skills and the competencies, when they love what they do, so they have the strengths, the energies for the role, and where they align the skills and the strengths, the energy, with the organization's values as well as a strategy. So for us, it's important to have all three rather than missing any elements out of the jigsaw. There's a growing evidence base now for strengths-based recruitment, and people are adding to this all the time. So we've captured a few examples here. Higher cost reduced by 40%, staff turnover reduced from 29 to 20% in 2 years, conversion rate for job offers rising too. There's a quote from the head of people and organisation development at Housing Ombudsman. Standard Chartered reported a 40% increase in revenue generated by sales staff within 3 to 6 months of that campaign. So there's a raft of data that's now developing. By the way, as we go through, do just ask questions or make comments. Anything you want to say or know is fine. So I mentioned that we would talk about the techniques that we advocate and that we've developed. One of those is what we call the OPAL interviewing technique. And we call it OPAL because it's a nice acronym, but not only that, it's also because opals in nature can diffract light and appear differently colored in different conditions. And we feel that that captures the essence of the strengths-based approach to recruitment. So recognizing the uniqueness of each individual, you know, it's kind of every color under the rainbow, essentially. To take you through it in a kind of simple sense, that for us, the OPAL approach to interviewing captures the effectiveness of individuals, likely effectiveness of individuals in role. So we start off with outcomes. outcomes that are critical for success rather than inputs. So for us, it's very important that the whole approach to interviewing and to assessment is focused on those key outcomes. So in fact, in developing an assessment approach with a new role or in a new organization, it's important to go through the job analysis approach that you'll be familiar with, albeit to include and incorporate strengths into that and actually use strengths as a kind of centerpiece for that job analysis effort. Part of that job analysis is to identify the crucial role outcomes for that particular job. So you start with outcomes. You then move on to eliciting from the individual the productive strengths, so those strengths that they have that they've used in order to deliver those role critical outcomes in that particular context. You also ask them about their agility, their ability to use strengths across different situations. This, for us, brings up the important risk area of strengths in overdrive. You'll probably be familiar with this it's become fairly popular now as a concept, but this notion that a strength could be anything, for example, collaboration, great strength, you're able to connect with people, find common ground, you enjoy that process of reaching out to people and coming up with a project idea and delivering to that project with others. But in overdrive, that might look like over-consulting, going out to too many people to ask them questions and to gather their views before moving forward and delivering a result. In fact, it could look like lots of different things, and the reason for asking these questions in interview is to identify whether this person who you're interviewing knows the risks in themselves, knows the triggers that would lead to those risks becoming manifest, and has learned from that experience. So the final part of OPAL is learning from mistakes, learning from successes, learning how to nuance each of those strengths effectively, productively, so that they can deliver high performance in a variety of different situations. So that's OPAL. That's the kind of core of it, really. And we see this as I guess, an evolution of the competency approach rather than being a complete kind of paradigm breaking approach. It's building on what's already been developed and learned by interviewers, by HR professionals, consultants, line managers, and adding something new into the mix, which is this focus on strengths. So, as I mentioned, the OPAL approach, the OPAL interviewing technique, sits squarely and firmly in the first section of what you can see on the slide now. So here we're talking about the overall assessment approach and process, assessing effectiveness, assessing energy, and assessing team and organizational fit. So effectiveness equals OPAL, equals what we've just talked about on the previous slide, for us anyway. So the skill, the experience, the productive use of strengths in delivering job outcomes, as well as the flexibility of the skills and the strengths that an individual has and the application of learning from successes and mistakes. So effectiveness equals the OPAL approach. Energy, this second component you can see, we recommend the use of a tool that we've developed over the years called StrengthScope. And the energy component involves looking at the match between the StrengthScope strengths identified to deliver effectively on the outcome and the candidate's strengths. So it's enabling the interviewer to identify the likely energy and the natural fit for each role outcome. But it doesn't assume that just because you possess a particular strength, could be collaboration, as we just talked about, could be relationship building, could be results focus. It doesn't assume that you have to have that strength in order to be able to deliver effectiveness in that particular role. But we are interested in looking at what the match on paper actually looks like. However, we need to dig deeper and we need to understand whether the individual can use or has used whatever strengths they do have in order to drive productive outcomes within the role. So energy is the second component. The third component, which tends now to be utilized more by more organizations in more recruitment campaigns now, is this notion of fit. So the extent to which the candidate is likely to find the team and or the organization draining or energizing to work for based on the likely alignment and fit of their own values, their own preferred culture, their own preferred working environment, team climate, etc., with those that the organization and the role has to offer. So that's the third component. And we talk about this when we're working with clients. It's something that it tends to be included in every interview to some extent, but we, when thinking through the scoring of an interview, for example, we do recommend that this is captured. So we just had a question come through. So the question that we've had is, what is the difference between strength scope strength and candidate strength? Effectively, we use strength scope as our kind of central measurement tool and framework for understanding what individual candidate strengths are brought to bear. With the effectiveness component, we go beyond that. We ask them about their skills, we ask them about their experience as well. So it isn't just about their strengths using the strength scope framework or any other, but the answer to the question is that we are talking here about, for us anyway, strength scope strengths as defined, by ourselves using that tool. Hopefully that answers the question. So what I wanted to do by way of example, so I think it's all in that detail when it comes to a new and different approach, was to give to you some interview questions that we've developed for a role. So kind of real life example, if you like. And this is for a particular role, which is business development manager. You typically, you train people up so that they could ask the questions in this way. Apologies for the noise there. We've got David's just doing some drilling, actually. No, it's not David. There's some building noise next door. So apologies if you can hear that in the background. So the example I'm going to read out to you comes from this business development manager role profile. The first job outcome, critical job outcome for this role, is developing relationships with new clients, working closely with the consulting team to generate interest, stimulate momentum, and ultimately close sales in product consultancy and training solutions. The key strength that we've identified where we're trying to assess energy is, in this case, relationship building. So taking steps to build networks of contacts and act as a hub between people that you know. So series of questions here, and they relate to Opal, but they also integrate this idea of energy. So the first question is, tell me about when you've won a major new account with a client. So this is an outcome question relating to the job outcome that I just described. Second question is, what strengths, what skills, what knowledge did you draw on to drive that outcome? So here we're eliciting from the candidate their knowledge about their strengths, their skills, their background, that they drew on to actually achieve a successful end with that particular example. We go on to ask them, what did you find most energizing about the situation? And what did you find least energizing about the situation? So here we're moving into that assessment of energy. Then we move on to asking them about their agility and their learning, the A and the L of Opal. So tell me about a similar situation that has gone less well for you and what you learned about yourself in that situation. Finally, how have you applied that learning in other situations, and how would you apply the learning in this role? at the end of that, you go to scoring the interview. And in terms of effectiveness, energy, and fit, there are slightly different approaches for each. So for effectiveness, you would have described a relevant outcome with strong evidence of the personal impact of your strengths, your skills, your knowledge, and you would have demonstrated flexibility and application of learning. For energy, you would have demonstrated that you're highly energized by the strength, and you would have described how you enjoy using it and you're engaged and in flow when using it. Now, this is an area that needs some training in order for most interviewers, most line managers to deliver effectively. Nonetheless, it is trainable and it is doable. Finally, a fit question, which we didn't include in the example there. So likely to find the organization and or the team highly energizing to work for. Yeah, there's a question here. Does it matter if the candidate has used a different strength but got to the same outcome? Good question. And our view on that is that it doesn't matter. So what you're really interested in is the knowledge that the candidate has of the strengths that they do have and how they've used that strength or combinations of strengths in order to deliver the outcome that's required of the role. It's more likely, for example, in the previous example, if you have a relationship building strength and you've reported that in your strength scope profile, you're going to have more evidence of natural energy around the building of relationships productively. That said, it's quite conceivable and in fact quite likely that if you haven't developed skills and mastery of that strength, that it may sometimes go into overdrive. It may lead to unwanted outcomes, and it may be that you're not even aware of that. So really part of an effective strengths interview is to identify the knowledge that the individual has about what it is that motivates, what it is that energizes them, as well as the skills that they have. But I think it's a great question because we have the approach that we've taken is not purist in the sense. It's kind of it's a combination approach to say, you know, look, it is important that you can demonstrate that you have the strengths we've identified as being crucial to the role, but at the same time, you're unique. You're an individual, and we want to understand how you've used perhaps other strengths that we wouldn't necessarily associate with effectiveness in this role in order to deliver positive outcomes. So it's using both sources of evidence. Hopefully that answers the question. So moving on from the interview, question here, what other assessment approaches can support strengths interviewing? Okay, there's a question here around early stage recruitment, so specifically about CV sifts, and we're going to move on to talk about that now. And there's another question, which is, do you use an organizational or team strength scope composite to decide on the degree of fit, or is it gut feel? Sorry, I'll say that again. You actually can all see this one. Do you use an organizational or team strength scope composite to decide on the degree of fit, or is it gut feel? It tends to come from, no, I'll just go back to the question. It tends to come from the job analysis stage where you're talking to role holders, existing team members. You're talking to the line manager of the target role and asking those questions around, you know, what really matters in terms of the fit here. What are the cultural differences about this team or this organization compared to others? So in our view, and the approach that we take and we would advocate, it's good to be rigorous in identifying, you know, what it is that really matters, and indeed a composite team strength scope or strength scope group profile could help with that. Okay, we had another question. Has anyone had experience of where they have made a decision on fit that have been challenged by an unsuccessful candidate? So back to the point I just made, I guess, if you have rigor in the way that the um, fit element is measured, because in the job analysis some work has gone into that, then it makes it less subjective in our experience, more objective and more defensible. So our view is it's definitely worth spending that time looking at kind of multiple measurement points, asking people from a variety of areas of the organization what they be the case. I mean, in some cases it's relatively straightforward, where you have values for the organization that are absolutely lived and breathed, and everyone talks about them, and they're measurable to a degree, and you can ask then some quite specific questions around those values and alignment with those values, almost as a point of deselection for the individual, where they can be making a decision that, this role isn't necessarily for me, because the values that you have, while they sound great, don't necessarily fit with my own. But in some cases that won't be so evident, it won't be so transparent. So yeah, our view is it's worth spending the time during the job analysis phase to identify how important that fit aspect is, and then having multiple points of measurement to ensure that you're covering all the angles. Okay, so moving on to, and we'll have to be brief on this, but there's lots of directions we could go in with this. This relates to the CV SIFT question as well, by the way. Some comments on this. So, yeah, absolutely, in our view, you can ask good questions during sifting, either by telephone interview or on application form, combined with CV, to enable you to make early stage SIFT decisions based on likely strengths fit. It's all about the questions that you're asking. Actually, this becomes more obvious at perhaps video interview stage, where you're using video interviews. We've done a bit of this recently. This is something that seems to be becoming more current and more widely used now by more employers. So video interviewing is, if you're not aware, where you have a platform that individuals can log into. They have presented to them a series of interview questions, but this isn't done live. This is done asynchronously, and their responses are captured in the platform that's being used in that system. But you can choose to use whatever questions you want. Where we've worked with the client, they wanted to have strengths-based interview questions, and that provides you therefore with some immediate responses to questions that relate perhaps to fit, certainly to likely strengths that would be of value within the role and within the organization. And you get some more data than you would perhaps from just using telephone SIFs or CV SIFs, because you're looking at the individual's responses as well. So it's with training, it's easier to spot when people are becoming more energized, more articulate about particular responses that they're giving. Certainly with CV SIFT or application form SIFT, yeah, we've done that in the past, and it's worked well. Because you can get a good sense, with a good scoreable application form of the likely strengths fit and skills fit of an individual. So yeah, agreed. Particularly for volume roles, where you've got volume roles or where you've got a very, very high volume of applications, it does make sense to do that. So other things to talk about, something that's being developed increasingly now around this stage is situational judgment tests and situational strength tests as part of that. You'll probably be familiar with those, and as long as they are sufficiently role specific and locally validated, they can be a helpful addition as well. I guess that comes into the camp of psychometric data, ability tests, personality tests. It's a kind of adjunct to that as well. And then moving into kind of final stage of selection, assessment center exercises we found lend themselves really well to, as long as you develop them appropriately, to helping you assess objectively whether an individual can demonstrate a strength in action and a productive use of a strength in action, as well as their knowledge of and avoidance of strengths in overdrive. So during the interview, you've got ample opportunity to test that out. But at assessment center, you've also got primary evidence that you can access, observing people who are demonstrating or not demonstrating the evidence of a strength being used productively, which can help you validate the secondary data that you're getting from an interview. So whether that be role play or group activities or career presentations, we often talk about strengths presentations where people talk about the use of their strengths to date and their career to date. Case studies, whatever it may be, these are a really excellent way of observing, as I say, strengths in action, used productively, strengths in overdrive, as well as gathering that information on self-awareness and learning using post-exercise reflection sheets. So we tend to use those in our assessment centres to capture from the individual what they enjoyed, what energized them about an activity, what drained them about an activity, what they would have done differently had they had their time again, which we found can be a very helpful area to perhaps explore with them in interview, or just have as extra information around their self-awareness, their awareness of strengths. Of course, what we're talking about here in the round is not just relying on an interview, but actually having multiple assessment points that you can use in order to come to a conclusion on a candidate. So, last slide, I believe, for today's webinar. This shows you the various different products, tools, and training offers that we have as an organization. We've been focused exclusively on that first column of energized talent. The open interview process is largely what we've been talking about, as well as the strength scope standard as a way of assessing individual strengths, and actually as a way of effectively running a job analysis to look at the differences between high and low performers. We haven't spent so long talking about that. There's a whole raft of other applications of strengths that you can see in the rest of that table. But just wanted to mention that at this stage. So has anyone got any further questions having listened to the webinar? Any other kind of technical questions that we can answer here and now? Okay, if not, I'm going to hand back to David, who will bring proceedings to a close. Over to you, David.
Thank you, Paul. Just in terms of follow-up then, so some next steps. So first of all, we will send over the Steve Jobs link as well, because we understand there are a few audio and visual issues there, plus a copy of the slides and the recording as well. Also, just a short evaluation. So if you've got a minute or two spare, if you're happy to evaluate the webinar today, it would be gratefully appreciated. Just a few reminders about future webinars as well. We've got a few in the pipeline. So tomorrow we've got a session around strengths-based performance management. And then also this coming Friday, we've got strengths-based coaching as well. So please feel free to register on those sessions. There are one or two places left there. Thank you very much for your time today. Apologies for some of the earlier audio issues. So thank you for your patience there. And enjoy the rest of your day. Many thanks.